Perhaps it goes without saying, but the Gospels they're not biographies, they're Gospels. A little different type of literature. That's why they don't include things like a description of what Jesus looked like or what his normal meals were like or historical details like that. But rather, the Gospel accounts are invitations for us to encounter and to know Jesus personally. And so, Matthew and Luke, they begin with the infancy narratives, but otherwise they skip to the baptism of the Lord. And so Mark and John begin there, and Matthew and Luke begin the ministry of Jesus with his baptism, because it's through baptism that we also encounter the Lord. And as we read the story, today, we see that Jesus, he doesn't actually need to be baptized, but rather he's baptized for us, for our sake. And many of the fathers of the church commented that as Jesus has baptized the water, it doesn't sanctify him, but he sanctifies the water, so that way we can be sanctified by it, so we can come into relationship with God. But we have in the gospel today this appearance of Jesus there at the Jordan. He's baptized, and then St. Matthew tells us that there was a voice that came from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." And now, I know as myself, as growing up as a boy, as a young man, now as a man, whenever my dad would introduce me, so this is my son David. Like, I have a great respect for my dad, and so when he just calls me my son, that's enough for me to have a kind of a feeling of warmth and of pride and of joy as he's kind of claiming me as his own. And we can imagine that Jesus would have experienced something like that as well, maybe even to a greater degree, having been raised by his foster father Joseph, and now his true Father in heaven is declaring for him his love for him and declaring his sonship. But God also says, he adds that second line, "with whom I am well pleased," which kind of prompts the question, why do you think the Father is pleased with Jesus? What do you think? Why do you think the Father is pleased with Jesus? Because he does his will, right? I think most of us would think that, but I don't think that's right. And in particular, because at this point, Jesus, he hasn't really done anything special. He hasn't worked his first miracle. He hasn't begun preaching. He hasn't walked on the water or anything. In fact, the only decision that we see him making at this point in his life is he stayed behind in the temple and made his parents mad. Right? That's his only accomplishment so far, that's been recorded in the Gospels, is making his parents worried. I don't think it was that. I think he's pleased with them just because of who he is, just because he's his son. Because he's a reflection of the Father, and that's enough for the Father to be pleased. And I think that's really important. And it's really important for us. Here at the beginning of Mass, I mentioned that we're invited here at the beginning of Mass to kind of at the beginning of the year, to kind of renew our own discipleship with Jesus. And the church and the first, the beginnings of the Gospels that we'll be reading over the next few weeks, they invite us to go back to that initial encounter, because what's supposed to happen is that we have an encounter with the Lord. We learn about God as we're young, as we're baptized. We learn about him, and as we grow older, we learn how to pray and to encounter him more personally, and we start kind of making conscious decisions to live the way that he calls us to live, and to live lives in communion with him, and just motivated by that encounter with God and that awareness of his love, we just work to conform our lives to his, because he's good. And if he's good, then we want him to be reflected more in ourselves. We just want to kind of share and reflect his goodness, and it becomes a very natural thing to live according to God's commands, because we've just kind of been marinated in his love. But if we don't have that, then when we try to follow God's commands, then we kind of feel like we're jumping through hoops, or we're trying to do something that's a little bit impossible, or we're trying to reach a standard that we just can't reach, or we're just never quite good enough, or something along those lines. And so we're invited to kind of go back. Because even Jesus, after he hears those words, what does he do? If we were to continue reading the very next line of the gospel, he goes out to the desert for 40 days. And we know that he's tempted by the devil, but that doesn't come to the very end of those 40 days. For 40 days, he has those words ringing in his ears. That's the last thing that he heard before going off into silence and not having another conversation with anyone. For 40 days, he just keeps listening to those words ringing in his ears, "You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased." And then, after that, then he's able to go and to do all of the things that the Father calls him to do, to live that life of extraordinary sacrifice and even to carry the cross. And so it is with ourselves. And so in a few weeks, we'll start reading through the Sermon on the Mount, the sermon that kind of teaches us what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. But before that, I just want to encourage everyone to just, to allow those words to ring in your ears. You are my beloved Son. You are my beloved daughter. With you I am well pleased. And to don't really, do anything else for the next few weeks, but just to allow those words to sink in, so that way, when it comes time to talk about how we respond to the Lord, and in 7 weeks when we get to the season of Lent, when we kind of focus on our own response to God and our own works of penance, we can do it with that same sense that Jesus did. That response, that kind of wholehearted, natural response to the love that God the Father has for each one of us.